My name is Chloe. I am 27 years old. I was sitting in my sterile apartment eating instant ramen when a collection agency called to inform me I was $120,000 in debt. My parents had stolen my identity to open 5 platinum credit cards, using them to fund my brother's luxury European vacation and buy him a brand new Porsche 911. When I confronted them, my father laughed in my face, telling me to get a second job and pay it off because family takes care of family. What they did not know was that as a certified forensic accountant, I track money laundering and identity theft for the federal government. By putting my name on those fraudulent accounts, they had just handed me the federal evidence I needed to send them all to prison. Before I show you exactly how I dismantled their lives, please tell me your age in the comments and welcome to Sweet Karma Life. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been financially manipulated by relatives who treated you like an ATM. Now let me take you back to that Sunday afternoon and the phone call that ended my family. The broth was lukewarm, tasting faintly of cheap seasoning and plastic packaging. I sat at the particle board island in my Alexandria apartment, swirling noodles around a fork. Rain lashed against the single window overlooking the parking lot. The only sound inside was the steady mechanical hum of the refrigerator. Then my phone vibrated against the laminate counter. The screen displayed an unknown toll-free number. I answered. A polite clinical voice introduced himself as a representative from a national debt recovery firm. He asked to verify my identity using the last 4 digits of my social security number. I recited them. He paused, typing echo through the receiver before he informed me that my accounts had entered the 90-day delinquency window. Which accounts? I asked, resting my fork on the rim of the bowl. The 5 platinum tier credit lines, the voice replied, smooth and practiced. And the auto loan. Our records show an outstanding balance of $120,000. This includes the financing for a Porsche 911 Carrera. Shall we establish a payment plan today? I did not drop the phone. My heart rate stayed level. I simply asked for the billing zip code associated with the loans. 22101, he read. McLean, Virginia. He recited the street address. Maplewood Drive. My parents' house. I thanked the representative for his time, ended the call, and pulled my work laptop from my leather satchel. Accessing the major credit bureaus takes me less than 3 minutes. The screen illuminated with red warning markers. 5 maxed-out credit limits, dozens of high-interest cash advances, a fresh 6-figure vehicle note. My credit score, historically anchored near 800, had cratered into the low 500s. I clicked into the underlying transaction history. The primary account holder was me. The authorized user permitted to draw funds on the cards, and the listed cosigner on the vehicle was Chase. Chase is my older brother. He is 29, though his lifestyle suggests a much younger demographic. He calls himself a venture capitalist. In reality, he operates out of a converted suite in my parents' basement, pitching vague tech startups that never materialize past a digital slide deck. Our parents, Richard and Patricia, fund his overhead. They view his perpetual failures as the misunderstood struggles of an impending genius. I am 27. I moved out the week I turned 18. Financed my way through a state university using scholarships and overnight shifts, and have not asked them for a dime since. They view my quiet independence as a personal insult. Whenever I refused to swipe my debit card to cover the catering for Chase's lavish birthday parties, my mother would intentionally leave my name off the guest list for the family holiday dinners. The issue staring back at me from the LED screen was not merely the staggering dollar amount. It was the clearance. I am a forensic financial auditor for a federal oversight agency in Washington, D.C. My daily workload involves tracking wire fraud, dismantling shell companies, and prosecuting interstate identity theft. To maintain my employment and my top-secret security clearance, I am required to submit to strict financial audits. Unexplained debt or sudden credit drops are immediate grounds for suspension. A compromised background check means turning in my badge, losing my pension, and ending my career. By forging my signature, my family had not just purchased a German sports car, they had handed me a professional death sentence. I sat there in the quiet apartment processing the betrayal. There was no confusion. There was no wondering if this was a clerical error. The paper trail was pristine. The cash advances were pulled directly from ATMs in Rome and Paris, aligning perfectly with the 2-week European tour Chase had plastered all over his social media last month. The vehicle registration fees matched the exact date my mother posted a proud photo of Chase standing in front of a luxury dealership holding a set of keys. They had celebrated his success using my stolen future as the currency. I closed the laptop lid. The screen went black, reflecting my expression. There were no tears, just math. I grabbed my car keys from the ceramic bowl by the door. Maplewood Drive was a 40-minute commute. I did not call ahead. I did not send an angry text message. I just walked out into the rain, locked the door behind me, and started the engine. The drive across the Potomac River gave me too much time to think. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm against the glass, pushing away the heavy precipitation. I thought about the day I left for college, packing my clothes into garbage bags because my mother refused to lend me a suitcase. I thought about how my father told me accounting was a dead-end job for people with no imagination. He said Chase had the vision. Chase was going to build an empire. Now I realize their empire was built entirely on my stolen identity. They did not just take my money. They took my pristine record, the only thing I had built entirely on my own. As I turned onto the manicured streets of McLean, the houses grew larger, the lawns greener. I pulled up to the familiar brick colonial. Sitting right there in the driveway, getting washed clean by the rain, was a gleaming silver Porsche 911 Carrera. It had temporary dealer plates. I parked my 10-year-old sedan right behind it, blocking it in. I turned off the ignition and took a deep breath. It was time to go home for Sunday dinner. I parked my 10-year-old sedan squarely behind the gleaming silver bumper of the newly minted sports car. The rain was coming down harder now, washing over the temporary dealer tags. I sat behind my steering wheel for a moment, watching the water bead off the expensive German engineering. It was a beautiful machine. It was also a rolling felony. I grabbed my leather satchel, stepped out into the storm, and walked up the bluestone path. The front door was unlocked. It always was. My parents lived in a neighborhood where crime was something you only read about in the newspaper. They had no idea that the call was coming from inside the house. I stepped into the grand foyer. The air conditioning was running high, countering the humidity of the storm outside. The house smelled of roasted garlic rosemary and expensive olive oil. From the kitchen down the hall, I heard the clinking of crystal glasses and the low, smooth rhythm of jazz playing through the hidden ceiling speakers. It was the soundtrack of a family without a single financial care in the world. I walked down the hardwood hallway and turned into the kitchen. My father, Richard, stood by the stainless steel stove, wearing a pristine cashmere sweater, expertly carving a flank steak on a butcher block. My mother, Patricia, sat on a velvet upholstered bar stool, swirling a deep red vintage in an oversized glass. And leaning against the custom cabinetry, wearing a tailored linen shirt that I had apparently financed, was my brother Chase. He was casually tossing a heavy leather key fob into the air and catching it. Over and over. The silver crest of the vehicle flashing under the recessed lighting with every rotation. They did not notice me at first. They were too busy laughing at a joke Chase had just delivered. It was a portrait of perfect suburban success. A wealthy family enjoying a quiet Sunday evening, celebrating the triumphs of their eldest child. I walked to the center of the room. I unlatched the brass buckles of my satchel. I pulled out the dense stack of printed credit reports, bank statements, and loan originations. I dropped the thick bundle directly onto the white marble island. The paper hit the solid stone with a dull, heavy thud. The laughter stopped. 3 heads turned toward me. "You look soaked, Chloe," my father noted, gesturing with the carving knife. "Take your shoes off the hardwood. You are tracking water everywhere." "I just got a call from a national debt recovery agency," I stated. My voice did not shake. It was entirely level. "There is $120,000 of unsecured debt attached to my Social Security number. 5 maxed-out platinum tier accounts, and a fresh vehicle note for the machine parked in the driveway." I expected the color to drain from their faces. I expected someone to drop a glass. I prepared myself for stammering excuses, frantic apologies, or a desperate plea for forgiveness. Instead, my father simply sighed, setting the knife down. He picked up a linen napkin, wiped his hands, and actually laughed. It was a short, breathy chuckle of pure dismissal. "You always were so dramatic," he said, picking up his wine glass. "We were going to tell you over dinner. There is no need to barge in here throwing papers around like a trial lawyer." My mother took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink. She looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance, as if I had just complained about the weather. "Chase needs reliable transportation," she added smoothly. "He is launching his new consulting firm this quarter. He cannot pull up to pitch meetings with high net worth investors driving a standard sedan. Image is everything in the venture capital space. He needed seed capital. Seed capital." I repeated the phrase, tasting the sheer absurdity of it. "You forged my electronic signature on federal banking documents. You stole my identity. That is not seed capital. That is wire fraud." Chase finally stopped tossing the keys. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the marble counter. "You just do not understand how business works, sis," he said, flashing that familiar arrogant smirk. "You sit in a cubicle all day crunching numbers for bureaucrats. Real wealth requires leverage. I am using your excellent credit history as leverage. When my first client signs, I will pay off the balances. Everyone wins." I looked at my brother. I remembered being 19 years old, working the graveyard shift at the university library just to afford textbooks. That same week, Chase had failed out of his second semester of college. Instead of cutting him off, my parents bought him a fully funded spring break trip to Cabo San Lucas to help him process his academic stress. The dynamic had never changed. I was the workhorse. He was the show pony. "I am not asking for an explanation," I said, keeping my posture rigid. "I am telling you to call those financial institutions tomorrow morning. You will sell the car back to the dealership. You will liquidate whatever assets you need to close those 5 accounts. And you will remove my name from everything." My mother slammed her glass down on the marble. The dark liquid splashed over the rim, staining the pristine white stone. "Do not come into my house and issue demands to your family," she snapped, her voice elevating into that shrill tone she used to win arguments through pure volume. "We raised you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. You have no husband. You have no children. You live in a tiny, sterile box of an apartment, hoarding your government salary. You have the bandwidth to help your brother build his legacy." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch. "You want me to pay for it?" I asked quietly. "It is the least you could do," Patricia fired back, crossing her arms. "Get a second job on the weekends. Cover the monthly minimums until Chase gets his firm off the ground. Family takes care of family, Chloe. It is time you started acting like you belong to this one." I looked at my father. He had resumed carving the meat, completely undisturbed by the conversation. He had already tuned me out. I looked at Chase. He gave me a tiny mocking salute with the key fob before turning his attention back to his phone. They were not going to fix this. They genuinely believed they were entitled to my future. They did not see me as a daughter, a sister, or even a human being. They looked at me and saw nothing but a limitless line of credit waiting to be drained. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not flip the heavy butcher block or smash the crystal glasses against the custom tile backsplash. Emotional outbursts are a sign that you still care about the relationship. I felt nothing but a cold, hollow clarity settling into my chest. I reached out and pulled the thick stack of financial documents back into my satchel. I fastened the brass buckles with 2 sharp clicks. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. I turned around and walked out of the kitchen. I did not look back as I walked down the hallway, out the front door, and back into the pouring rain. I got into my car and backed out of the driveway, carefully avoiding the silver bumper of my brother's new toy. The drive back to Alexandria felt different. The shock was gone, replaced by a hyper-focused mechanical rhythm. They thought I was just a cubicle worker crunching numbers for bureaucrats. They had no idea what my security clearance actually entailed. They had no idea that tomorrow morning I was going to log on to my secure federal terminal and begin building the exact type of investigative dossier that destroys lives. Monday morning arrived with the sterile fluorescent glare of the federal building. I swiped my identification badge at the ground floor security turnstile. The heavy glass gates parted. I placed my leather satchel on the X-ray conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector. The guard nodded at me. He saw me every day arriving at 7 in the morning sharp. He did not know that today I was walking into the building as a victim of a massive financial crime. I rode the elevator to the 12th floor. The floor was quiet. My department handles interstate financial crimes and corporate embezzlement. The people who work here are quiet, methodical, and relentless. I walked to my desk, turned on my monitor, and sat down. The protocol for discovering fraud tied to your own Social Security number is strict. If I walked into my director's office right now and reported the debt, my top secret clearance would be suspended immediately. It is standard operating procedure. A financial vulnerability makes an agent a prime target for bribery or blackmail. I would be put on unpaid administrative leave while Internal Affairs conducted a 90-day investigation. I could not afford that. I needed undeniable ironclad proof that I was the victim, not a willing participant, before I breathed a word of this to anyone. I opened a secure browser window. I did not use classified government databases. That would be an unauthorized use of federal resources and a fireable offense. I did not need them anyway. People who commit fraud out of sheer entitlement are universally sloppy. I use legal, publicly available forensic tools. Property records, open source intelligence, and state business registries. I started with the 5 platinum credit lines. Pulling the public routing data for the monthly minimum payments was simple. The payments were trickling in from a regional bank account registered to a limited liability company. The entity was named Chase Global Solutions. I ran the company name through the State Corporate Commission database. The business was registered 6 months ago. The listed operating address was Maplewood Drive, my parents' house. The registered agent was Chase. But the guarantor, the person legally responsible for the corporate structure, was me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The credit cards and the sports car were bad enough, but a fraudulent corporate entity was an entirely different category of ruin. I dug deeper, pulling the Uniform Commercial Code filings connected to the business. That was when I found the loan. It was a small business administration loan, a federal program designed to help struggling entrepreneurs launch legitimate ventures. The principal amount was $250,000. The application claimed the company had 10 employees and projected $1 million in first-year revenue. It was a complete fabrication. Chase had no employees. He had a laptop and a basement bedroom. My parents had not just ruined my credit score. They had used my stolen identity to actively defraud a United States government loan program. They crossed the line from standard familial financial abuse into federal wire fraud. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and looked at the digital signature on the loan documents. It was my name, perfectly spelled out in a generated cursive font. The timestamp showed the document was signed at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I remembered that specific Tuesday. I was sitting in a windowless conference room deposing a corrupt hedge fund manager. I had been offline for 8 hours. My mother had always been the architect of these illusions. My mind drifted back to the morning of my 18th birthday. Most teenagers wake up to balloons or a cake. I woke up to Patricia standing in my bedroom holding a printed spreadsheet. She informed me that since I was legally an adult, I would now be paying $600 a month for rent and utilities. I was working retail at the time, making minimum wage. I paid her every single month. It took me years to discover that my rent money was going directly into a separate account used to pay off Chase's overloaded credit cards. He was 22 at the time, unemployed and taking weekly trips to Miami. She demanded rent from the daughter who worked and gave the cash to the son who refused to try. That was the dynamic. I was the safety net. Chase was the acrobat who refused to learn how to catch the trapeze. I focused my attention back on the screen. The anger was there, but I pushed it down, channeling it into the investigation. I needed to build a shadow file, a dossier so pristine that no defense attorney could ever unravel it. I pulled the internet protocol logs tied to the digital signature on the federal loan application. The string of numbers matched the residential internet service provider registered to the McLean address. They did not even use a virtual private network to hide their tracks. They literally committed federal fraud using their own home internet connection. Next, I traced the cash flow. The $250,000 was deposited into the Chase Global Solutions business account. From there, the money fractured. It did not go toward business expenses. I tracked wire transfers paying for the European vacation. I found clearing numbers matching high-end restaurants, tailored clothing boutiques, and a premium membership at a local country club. The down payment for the Porsche originated from this exact account. They were treating a federal small business loan like a personal piggy bank. I spent the next 4 hours taking meticulous screenshots. I downloaded bank routing histories, internet protocol logs, and the forged corporate formation documents. I created a heavily encrypted folder on my local drive, labeling it with a random string of alphanumeric characters. Every piece of evidence I gathered was a nail in the coffin they had built for themselves. By noon, my dossier was 80 pages long. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had no knowledge of the accounts, that the money was solely accessed by Chase and my parents, and that the entire operation was orchestrated from their living room. I printed a hard copy, formatting the pages cleanly and sliding them into a thick black binder. I locked the binder inside the bottom drawer of my desk. The trap was set. All I needed was the right moment to spring it. I closed the final browser tab and picked up my cold cup of coffee. Before I could take a sip, my cell phone lit up on the desk. The screen displayed a text message notification. It was Chase. The message was short. The Porsche needs its scheduled maintenance package. I need you to call the bank and authorize a credit limit increase by $5,000. Do it before noon. I stared at the glowing screen. He was not calling to apologize. He was not calling to explain. He was demanding more money from a well that was already poisoned. He thought I was still playing the role of the obedient, silent sister. He had no idea the game had already changed. I picked up the phone. It was time to give them exactly enough rope to finish the job. My cell phone buzzed against the solid mahogany of my office desk. The caller identification displayed my brother's name. I let the device vibrate twice before answering. I placed the phone on the glass surface, engaging the speaker function so I could keep my hands on my keyboard. Chase did not say hello. He did not ask if I was busy working. He simply issued a directive. The service department at the dealership needs $5,000 for a premium maintenance package, he said. His tone was casual, bordering on bored. I tried to run the platinum card, but it declined. You need to call the bank right now and authorize a credit limit increase. Give them your social security number to expedite the override. I have a networking dinner at 8, and I need the vehicle detailed and serviced by 6. I listened to the static on the line. The sheer audacity of his request hung in the sterile air of my cubicle. He was not calling to apologize for the $120,000 of fraudulent debt he had accumulated in my name. He was calling to demand more. This was the same boy who used to steal the allowance money from my bedroom dresser when we were children. When I caught him red-handed, my parents scolded me for leaving cash out in the open where it might tempt him. They taught him early that his desires superseded my boundaries. "I am not calling the financial institution," I replied. My voice remained steady and flat. "I told you yesterday to return the vehicle and close the accounts." A heavy theatrical sigh echoed through the speaker. "Stop being difficult, Chloe," he groaned. "You are holding up the line at the service counter. Just make the call." "I will pay you back when the consulting firm lands its first major contract. This is a temporary cash flow issue." "It is not a cash flow issue," I stated. "It is a federal crime. Do not contact me for money again." I pressed the red icon on the screen, ending the call. Silence returned to my office, but it lasted less than 3 minutes. My phone screen lit up with rapid-fire text message notifications. They were from my mother, Patricia. She always operated as the rapid response enforcer whenever Chase faced the slightest resistance. I picked up the device. The messages were long walls of text, devoid of standard grammar or punctuation. She accused me of trying to sabotage my brother's future. She wrote that I was a selfish, ungrateful daughter sitting in my ivory tower in Washington while my family struggled. The final text was an ultimatum. "If you do not support your brother's dreams and authorize that limit increase, you are dead to us. Do not bother coming home for Thanksgiving. Do not ever call us again. You will be cut out of this family permanently." Most daughters would crumble reading those words. They would cry or draft a frantic apology trying to salvage the fragile relationship. I felt a surge of cold, calculating adrenaline. Patricia thought she was wielding the ultimate weapon by threatening excommunication. She did not realize she had just stepped directly into my territory. In a federal financial investigation, documentary evidence is the gold standard. Confessions obtained under duress or in a heated verbal argument can be challenged in court, but a spontaneous, voluntary, written admission of guilt is an unbreakable chain. I needed her to put her exact crimes in writing. I needed her to explicitly detail the scope of the fraud. I played the role she expected me to play, the confused, intimidated daughter. I typed my response carefully, ensuring my language was vague enough to prompt a detailed explanation. I replied, "I do not even understand what is happening. You are blaming me, but I do not know what accounts you are talking about. How did you even bypass the security protocols to get a car loan in my name? I never gave you permission to do this." I hit send and waited. I watched the 3 gray typing bubbles appear on the screen. They danced for a long time, indicating a massive response was being drafted. Patricia was arrogant and technologically illiterate. She viewed text messages as private, fleeting conversations, not permanent digital records. The response landed. It was a treasure trove of self-incrimination. She did not just confess. She justified the crime. "We used your social security number because you owe us," she wrote. "We fed you and clothed you for 18 years. We took out the Capital One card, the Chase Sapphire, the Discover line, and the American Express to fund his business startup. We signed your name on the auto loan because your credit score was higher and we needed the Tier 1 interest rate. You are our child and your assets belong to this family. Stop playing the victim and help your brother." I read the paragraph twice, verifying the contents. She had explicitly named the 4 distinct financial institutions. She admitted to utilizing my protected identifying information. She openly acknowledged forging my signature on the auto financing contract. The motive was clearly stated. It was a flawless, uncoerced confession to multiple felony counts. I did not reply to her message. Instead, I immediately initiated the evidence preservation protocol. I took high-resolution digital captures of the entire text thread. I exported the raw communication data, ensuring the timestamps and originating phone numbers were permanently embedded in the file metadata. I uploaded the encrypted package to a secure cloud server disjointed from any personal devices. I sent the captured images to the heavy-duty laser printer stationed down the hall. The machine whirred to life, spitting out crisp, high-contrast pages of the text exchange. I retrieved the warm sheets of paper and slid them into the black binder resting in my bottom desk drawer. The shadow file was now complete. I had the fraudulent loan documents, the internet routing logs tracing back to their living room, and a written confession from the primary conspirator. The trap was fully armed and ready to spring. I closed the drawer and locked it, sliding the key into my blazer pocket. I felt a fleeting sense of victory. But that satisfaction evaporated an hour later when an automated email arrived in my personal inbox. It was an urgent alert from my property management company. The collateral damage of my family's actions was bleeding out of the digital realm and starting to dismantle my actual physical life. The physical world always catches up to the digital one. It started on Wednesday with the mail. I unlocked my aluminum mailbox in the lobby of my building and pulled out a thick stack of envelopes. They were not standard bills. They were heavy stock paper bearing the logos of premium financial institutions. The return addresses belonged to loss mitigation departments and asset recovery teams. I stood under the flickering fluorescent light of the lobby, tearing open the flaps. The language inside was uniform and sterile. Notice of default. Immediate action required. Acceleration of debt. They were demanding the full balance of the platinum cards, citing violations of the terms of service due to missed initial payments. I stacked the letters neatly, slid them into my satchel, and walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my unit. 10 minutes later, my laptop chimed with an incoming email. It was from the leasing manager at a luxury high-rise across town. I had toured the building 2 weeks prior, planning to upgrade my living situation. The neighborhood was secure, the amenities were modern, and my income easily supported the rent. I opened the message. The text was brief. They regretted to inform me that my application was denied. The automated screening software had flagged the catastrophic drop in my FICO score alongside multiple severe derogatory marks. My credit profile, which I had meticulously curated since I was 18 years old, was now indistinguishable from a chronic gambler filing for bankruptcy. The walls of my current apartment felt closer together. The water stain on the ceiling mocked me. I was trapped here, tethered to a manufactured financial ruin, while my brother drove a German sports machine through the affluent suburbs. But panic is a useless emotion. It clouds judgment. I closed the email, washed my face with cold water, and prepared for the workday. When I arrived at the agency the next morning, I did not go straight to my cubicle. I walked past the rows of desks and knocked on the frosted glass door of my division director. Marcus was a veteran investigator with sharp eyes and zero tolerance for inefficiency. He waved me in without looking up from his monitor. I sat in the leather chair opposite his desk and pitched a proactive initiative. I told him I was noticing a structural shift in domestic wire fraud, specifically utilizing limited liability companies to siphon federal Small Business Administration funds. I requested authorization to run a localized sweep targeting phantom entities registered in the Northern Virginia sector over the past 6 months. It was a perfectly logical request aligned entirely with our current departmental mandates. Marcus appreciated initiative. He granted the authorization and handed me the operational codes required to access the deeper financial clearinghouse databases. I walked back to my desk with the keys to the kingdom. Up until this point, I had relied on public records and open source intelligence. Now, I had the full weight of federal tracking software at my fingertips. I immediately fed the routing numbers for Chase Global Solutions into the system. The software chewed through the data, mapping a transactional architecture of my brother's supposed consulting firm. The visualization bloomed across my dual monitors. It was a masterpiece of incompetence. A legitimate business operates like a cardiovascular system, pumping money in and out through payroll vendor invoices and operational expenses. Chase's company functioned like a black hole. There were no outgoing payments to graphic designers, no invoices for server hosting, no payroll taxes remitted to the state. The only incoming capital was the stolen $250,000 federal loan. The outgoing transfers were exclusively funneled into a single destination: my brother's personal checking account. He was not even attempting to build a fake business. He was using the corporate structure as a crude washing machine to convert government funds into personal liquidity. It was the exact same strategy he employed during his sophomore year of college when he convinced our parents to fund a groundbreaking app development company. They gave him $10,000. He spent it on designer clothes and a month-long rental of a beachfront condo, telling them he needed an inspiring environment to code. They believed him then. They were funding him now. I kept digging, pulling the collateral documentation attached to the massive loan. $250,000 is rarely dispersed without secured assets backing the debt. I accessed the federal lending database and cross-referenced the county property records. The documents loaded onto my screen. My breath caught in my throat. The cold mechanical rhythm I had maintained for days faltered. My parents had not just used my name to open the account. They had leveraged their own real estate to back it. There was a freshly filed subordinate lien against the brick colonial on Maplewood Drive. Richard and Patricia had legally pledged the family home as collateral to guarantee the federal funds for Chase Global Solutions. But the devastating part was the master promissory note. They had forged my digital signature as the primary borrower and sole personal guarantor on the SBA loan documents. They were using their house as the bait, but they had placed my neck in the federal noose. If the consulting firm defaulted, which was mathematically inevitable, given that Chase was spending the principal on luxury car maintenance and European vacations, the federal government would seize their house and then come directly after my wages and pension to satisfy the remaining balance. The stakes instantly multiplied. This was no longer just about a ruined credit score or a repossession. This was a $250,000 anvil hanging directly over my neck. Furthermore, because the funds were obtained by defrauding a federal program, the liability carried severe criminal penalties. If I waited too long to report this, if the loan went into default before I blew the whistle, I would move from the victim column to the suspect column. I would be looking at federal prison time for wire fraud and conspiracy. My parents had built a bomb, handed it to me, and walked away, oblivious to the timer ticking down. I leaned back in my chair, the soft hum of the office fading into background noise. I realized the profound depth of their betrayal. They were willing to sacrifice my freedom to fund his delusion. The window for a quiet resolution had closed. If I did not strike immediately, my life would be dismantled permanently. I printed the property lien and added it to the black binder. The dossier was lethal. It was time to deploy it. But I could not just drop it on my director's desk on a random Tuesday. I needed to witness them one last time. I needed to look them in the eye before I burned their artificial world to the ground. And the perfect venue was already marked on my calendar. This upcoming Saturday, the family was hosting a lavish catered event. Chase was officially celebrating his engagement to his new fiancée. It was an event entirely funded by my stolen identity. Saturday evening arrived with a stifling humidity that clung to the tailored fabric of my charcoal suit. The venue my parents selected was an exclusive botanical garden and event conservatory located in the wealthiest zip code of the county. I handed my car keys to a valet wearing a crisp white uniform. He drove my 10-year-old sedan away, parking it out of sight behind a line of luxury sport utility vehicles. The glass doors parted, revealing a scene of staggering excess. A classical string quartet played in the corner of the atrium under a canopy of imported weeping willows. Waiters in tuxedo vests circulated, carrying silver trays loaded with champagne flutes, Wagyu beef sliders, and tiny porcelain spoons holding black caviar. In the center of the room stood a towering ice sculpture carved into the shape of two intertwined swans resting on a pedestal of fresh roses. I did not see a celebration of love. I saw a ledger of stolen assets. I did the math as I walked across the polished marble floor. The conservatory rental alone cost $15,000 for a weekend evening. Premium open bar service pouring top-shelf liquor for 100 guests ran another $10,000. The floral arrangements cascading down the marble pillars were rare imported orchids, adding at least 5,000 to the total. The catering staff, the valets, the musicians, and the lighting crew represented another 10,000. Every single penny was currently sitting on the platinum credit lines tied directly to my Social Security number. I was funding my own financial execution while holding a glass of sparkling water. My brother Chase stood near the ice sculpture, holding court. Next to him was Jessica, his new fiancée. She wore a custom designer silk gown, holding a smartphone mounted on a handheld stabilizer ring. She was a social media influencer, though her audience consisted mostly of purchase followers and automated engagement bots. She recorded herself laughing, tossing her hair, and displaying the diamond ring on her finger. It was a massive 2-carat stone, catching the light from the chandeliers overhead. I recognized the jeweler from the transaction history in my shadow file. It cost $22,000. Jessica beckoned a waiter over, snapping her fingers to get his attention. She demanded a different brand of champagne, claiming the current vintage was ruining her aesthetic. The waiter nodded politely and hurried away to fulfill her request. Chase just laughed, wrapping his arm around her waist. They were a perfect match. Two people obsessed with projecting an image of wealth they did not actually possess. I walked to the bar and ordered sparkling water with a lime. I stood by a tall cocktail table, sipping my drink and watching the performance. The contrast between their manufactured joy and my clinical observation was sharp. They were celebrating a mirage. They had built a palace resting on a foundation of federal wire fraud, and they believed the walls were made of solid stone. Before I could take a second sip, a hand clamped onto my shoulder. I turned to face my mother. Patricia wore a navy blue evening gown that dragged slightly on the floor. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo, held together by hairspray and sheer force of will. She looked me up and down, taking in my sharp business attire and the heavy briefcase in my hand. Her expression tightened into a mask of polite hostility. "You decided to show up," she said, her voice dropping into a harsh whisper so the surrounding guests would not hear. "I am surprised you had the nerve after your little stunt the other night, refusing to help your own flesh and blood." "I received an invitation," I replied smoothly, keeping my posture relaxed. Patricia leaned closer. Her expensive perfume smelled heavy, masking the scent of the gin on her breath. "Listen to me very carefully, Chloe. This is your brother's night. Jessica has high-profile sponsors watching her content. You will mingle. You will smile. You will act like a supportive sister. If you cause a scene or mention a single word about that ridiculous credit issue, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. Do not ruin his perfect night." I looked into her eyes. There was no guilt in her gaze. She was operating under the delusion that threatening me would keep the secret buried. She viewed me as a subordinate employee who needed to be disciplined. "I will not ruin anything tonight," I said, taking another sip of water. "I am just here to observe." She glared at me for a moment longer before turning on her heel and disappearing into the crowd of wealthy guests. I spent the next hour walking the perimeter of the room. I did not speak to anyone. I took mental notes of the catering company, the photography crew, and the event planners. I watched my parents shake hands with local politicians and business owners, projecting an aura of immense success. Every smile, every handshake, every clinking glass was an act of theft. The evening reached its peak when my father tapped a silver spoon against a crystal glass. The sharp ringing sound cut through the ambient noise of the room. The string quartet stopped playing. The guests turned their attention to the grand staircase where Richard stood, holding a microphone. He wore a tailored tuxedo, looking every bit the patriarchal anchor of a successful dynasty. He cleared his throat and smiled down at Chase and Jessica. "Family and friends," he began, his voice echoing through the atrium speakers. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the union of two remarkable young people. When I look at my son Chase, I see the definition of a self-made man. A gentle round of applause rippled through the crowd. I stood near a pillar, watching the theater unfold. Chase did not inherit his success, Richard continued. He built his consulting firm from the ground up through grit, determination, and a relentless work ethic. He faced setbacks, but he never asked for a handout. He is a testament to the American spirit. He forged his own path, and tonight he stands before us, ready to share that bright future with his beautiful bride. Let us raise a glass to the happy couple. The guests raised their flutes, cheering. Chase beamed, wrapping an arm around Jessica as she captured the moment on her phone. Patricia stood next to the staircase, dabbing away a single performative tear with the lace handkerchief. My father had stood in front of 100 people and praised my brother for stealing my identity. He called a federal crime the American spirit. He labeled theft as grit. He praised his son for never taking a handout while simultaneously forging my signature to drain hundreds of thousands of dollars from my future. That was the moment the final trace of hesitation left my body. Sometimes you harbor a tiny irrational hope that the people who raised you might possess a hidden shred of morality. You think that maybe, underneath the entitlement, they feel a sliver of remorse for destroying your life. Standing in that extravagant hall, watching them drink stolen champagne, I realized with profound clarity that there was no saving them. They were parasites. They would drain every resource I possessed until I was destitute, and then they would step over my empty shell to find their next host. I did not need to stay for the cake cutting. I had seen enough. I placed my empty water glass on a passing silver tray. I tightened my grip on the handle of my briefcase and walked quietly toward the exit. No one noticed my departure. They were too busy celebrating the illusion. I retrieved my keys from the valet and slid into the driver's seat of my sedan. The digital clock on the dashboard read 9:30. The night was young. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the botanical garden parking lot. I did not drive toward my apartment. I merged onto the interstate, heading straight back into the city. The Federal Oversight Agency operates 24 hours a day. The building never sleeps. My shadow file was ready. The evidence was secured. It was time to finalize the report and drop the match on their house of cards. Tuesday morning arrived with a clear sky and a biting wind coming off the Potomac River. I dressed in a dark tailored suit, pinned my hair back, and picked up the black leather briefcase from my kitchen counter. It was heavier than usual. Over the past 48 hours, the shadow file had grown. It was now a 300-page dossier, meticulously indexed and tabbed, containing every forged document, every traced wire transfer, and every incriminating text message. I drove to the agency in silence. I did not turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the tires on the asphalt. When I reached the federal building, I went through the standard security checkpoints. The guards did not notice a difference in my demeanor. I swiped my badge, rode the elevator to the 12th floor, and walked through the glass double doors of my division. The bullpen was already humming with activity. Analysts typing, agents drinking coffee, phones ringing in the background. I bypassed my cubicle entirely. I walked straight to the corner office overlooking the street below. I knocked twice on the frosted glass. "Come in," Marcus called out. I opened the door and stepped inside, closing it firmly behind me. I engaged the deadbolt. A loud click echoed through the room. Marcus looked up from his dual monitors, his brow furrowed. Locking his door was a breach of standard office protocol, unless we were discussing active, classified intelligence. "Sit down, Chloe," he said, pointing to the leather chair opposite his desk. "You look like you are about to deliver a casualty report. Let me guess, your domestic shell company sweep found something massive." "I found a localized syndicate exploiting the Small Business Administration programs," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "They are using fraudulent entity formations to secure federal loans, then laundering the disbursements through personal checking accounts to fund luxury lifestyles. They are also sustaining the operation through severe interstate identity theft." Marcus leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. That is exactly what we are hunting. Give me the breakdown. Who are the principals? I unlatched my briefcase. I pulled out the dense 300-page binder and placed it directly in the center of his desk. The heavy thud resonated in the quiet office. The primary orchestrators are Richard and Patricia, my parents, I stated. The primary beneficiary and registered agent of the Phantom Corporation is Chase, my older brother. The stolen identity they are leveraging to secure the financing belongs to me. The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus stared at me, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to profound gravity. He did not ask if I was joking. We do not make jokes in this building. He reached out and opened the binder to the executive summary I had drafted. He spent the next 10 minutes reading. The only sound in the room was the rustle of heavy stock paper turning and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I watched his eyes scan the property lien, the forged digital signatures, and the printed text messages where my mother confessed to the crimes. When he reached the Uniform Commercial Code filings detailing the $250,000 federal loan, he stopped. He looked up at me. They defrauded a federal loan program using your credentials, he said softly, summarizing the most dangerous element of the dossier. They put a subordinate lien on their own residential property, tying you to the debt. If they default, the government will seize their home and then come after your wages to satisfy the remainder. I know, I replied, and the capital is already gone. They spent the principal on a European vacation, a luxury vehicle, and high-end retail. Default is mathematically certain within the next 60 days. Marcus closed the binder. He leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and looked at me with a mixture of professional respect and quiet sympathy. As an agent, you know the protocol, Chloe. By bringing this to me, your clearance is immediately flagged. You are placing your career on the line by initiating an internal review of your own compromised background. My career was compromised the second they forged my signature, I said. I am not here to protect my clearance. I am here to report a felony. Because the fraud involves a fake business entity defrauding federal loan systems, it falls directly under our agency jurisdiction. I am handing you a closed case, Marcus. I just need you to execute it. He nodded slowly. Are you prepared to sign the sworn affidavits under penalty of perjury? Once you put your name on that paper, you cannot retract it. We will move forward with or without your ongoing cooperation. Your family will face federal indictment. I reached into my suit pocket and retrieved my silver fountain pen. I placed it on the glass desk. I am ready. Marcus picked up his desk phone and pressed a single extension button. He requested a staff notary and an intake officer to report to his office immediately. Within 3 minutes, 2 agents entered the room carrying the standardized declaration forms. The process was entirely bureaucratic, devoid of any cinematic drama. I sat at the table, reading the standardized language. I swear that the information contained within this report is true and accurate to the best of my knowledge. I acknowledge that filing a false report is a federal offense. I signed my name 6 times. The notary stamped the pages, pressing his seal into the paper. The match was officially dropped. Marcus did not wait for a committee review. He possessed executive authority to secure compromised financial networks tied to active federal personnel. He logged into the Central Clearinghouse portal and entered my Social Security number. He bypassed the standard credit bureaus and went straight to the federal level, initiating a hard freeze and fraud alert across the entire national banking grid. The digital guillotine fell instantly. Within seconds, automated alerts fired off to the fraud departments of Capital One, the Chase Sapphire Network, Discover, and American Express. The algorithms recognized the federal flag and executed their programming. The platinum credit lines were instantly frozen. The available balances dropped to 0. Any pending transactions were abruptly canceled. Then Marcus flagged the Small Business Administration loan for immediate internal review, halting any further disbursements and freezing the Chase Global Solutions corporate checking account. The final stroke involved the auto financing. Marcus routed the identity theft alert to the specialized lending division that handled the Porsche note. That bank had zero tolerance for fraudulent origination. They instantly revoked the loan terms. Accessing the vehicle's internal telematics system, they pinged its exact GPS location, resting in my parents' driveway. An aggressive repossession order was automatically generated and dispatched to a local recovery team. I sat in the leather chair, watching the command line scroll across Marcus' monitor. It took less than 15 minutes to dismantle what my family thought was a permanent empire. They had spent months building a house of cards, using my name as the foundation. With a few keystrokes, the federal government had just pulled the foundation out from under them. I stood up, retrieved my pen, and thanked my director. I walked out of his office and back into the bullpen. I felt lighter. The crushing weight of the $250,000 debt was gone, transferred into the hands of federal prosecutors. Now the real-world consequences were racing toward the manicured lawns of McLean, Virginia. My brother was about to wake up to a reality he was entirely unprepared to survive. The digital execution happened faster than I anticipated. I sat at my office desk on Wednesday afternoon, watching the network logs update in real time. The algorithms powering the national financial grid do not care about family dynamics. They do not care about excuses. They only care about risk parameters and compliance flags. When the federal freeze order propagated through the clearinghouses, it acted like a titanium vault door dropping across a highway. The flow of stolen capital stopped instantly. Chase always believed wealth was a theatrical performance. Growing up, he would spend his entire summer allowance on a pair of designer sneakers just so the kids at the country club pool would notice him. He did not care that he had to skip lunches for a month to afford them. Image was his only currency. That same mentality drove him to a high-end automotive dealership that afternoon. He had promised his new fiancée a wedding present. He wanted to secure a brand-new Mercedes-Benz G-Class sport utility vehicle. I traced the transaction attempt as it registered on the monitoring software. He sat in a glass-walled office offering Jessica sparkling water while the finance manager ran the credit application. Chase handed over the platinum card to cover the initial $10,000 down payment. He expected the salesman to return with a leather binder and a set of keys. He was ready to play the role of the affluent venture capitalist, treating a luxury car like a casual impulse purchase. Instead, the manager returned empty-handed, looking profoundly uncomfortable. The system threw a hard decline. This was not a request to call the fraud department. This was not a simple verification prompt. It was a hard, unyielding denial. Chase laughed it off, pulling out a second card. Declined. He reached into his wallet for a third, his fingers visibly trembling against the expensive leather. Denied. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, catching the showroom lights. He forced a tight, artificial smile at Jessica, trying to project control, but the raw panic in his eyes was unmistakable. The manager quietly informed him that every single trade line attached to his profile was locked by a federal mandate. Jessica stopped recording her social media content. The ambient jazz music playing in the showroom suddenly felt very loud. Chase left the dealership flushed and humiliated, blaming a technical glitch. He drove the Porsche back to McLean, Virginia, entirely unaware that the vehicle was already marked for extraction. The second blow landed 3 hours later. The Specialized Lending Division did not waste time sending warning letters. When a federal identity theft flag hits an uncollateralized auto note, the bank acts immediately to secure their asset. They dispatched a professional recovery team. Chase had barely parked the silver sports car in my parents' driveway when a heavy-duty diesel tow truck turned onto Maplewood Drive. The driver did not knock on the front door. He did not ask for permission. He backed the flatbed right up to the rear bumper, dropped the hydraulic lift, and attached the steel winch cables to the undercarriage. The grinding sound of the metal chains alerted the house. My father walked out onto the front porch holding a coffee mug. Chase sprinted out the front door, demanding the driver unhook his property. He waved the fake corporate registration documents, shouting about his consulting firm. The tow operator, a man who repossessed vehicles for a living, barely looked at him. He simply handed Chase a printed notice of immediate forfeiture and pressed the winch button. The Porsche was dragged up the ramp, its tires scraping against the steel bed. Neighbors who had attended the lavish engagement party days earlier now peeked through their custom blinds, watching the crown jewel of my brother's manufactured success get strapped down and hauled away. The physical manifestation of their ruin was impossible to ignore. The house of cards was not just leaning, the wind had ripped it apart. My cell phone began to vibrate on my desk right at 4 o'clock. The caller identification flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 4 times, letting the panic ferment on her end before I picked up the device. I did not say hello. I just pressed the phone to my ear. "Chloe!" Her voice was a shrill, frantic screech that pierced through the receiver. "You need to call the banks right now! Every single account is frozen! Chase tried to buy lunch and his card was rejected. The auto lender just stole his car right out of the driveway. They made a massive mistake. You have to fix this right this second." She was hyperventilating. The foundation of her reality was cracking, and she expected me to supply the mortar to patch it. She still thought I was the obedient scapegoat ready to absorb their problems. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. I looked out the window at the Washington Monument piercing the gray sky. My voice was cold and deliberate. "It is not a mistake, Patricia," I said. "I told you on Sunday to pay off the balances. You refused, so I reported the fraud to my employer." There was a pause. It was not a silence born of confusion. It was the terrifying stillness of a mind finally connecting the dots. For 27 years, she viewed me as a compliant subsidiary, a minor character in her play. She only saw the title on my business cards, not the authority it carried. Forensic financial auditor. She finally understood what those 3 words actually meant. "You," she stammered, the air leaving her lungs. "You turned in your own brother? You reported us!" "I reported a syndicate committing interstate wire fraud," I corrected her. A scuffle echoed through the phone. I heard heavy breathing and the sound of the device changing hands. My father took the line. The booming, confident patriarch who had mocked me 3 days ago was gone. His voice was thin, trembling with raw, unfiltered fear. "Chloe, honey, listen to me," Richard pleaded. The words tumbled out of his mouth in a desperate rush. "We can fix this. Keep it in the family. I will sell my vintage watch collection. I will liquidate my retirement portfolio. We can get the money. Just call the bank. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Withdraw the complaint, please." "Do not ruin your brother's life." He was bargaining. He thought he was dealing with the customer service representative. He thought wealth could buy his way out of consequence. He believed that an apology and a promise to pay would erase the forged signatures and the stolen funds. I delivered the final blow, letting the words strike with surgical precision. "It is not the bank, Dad," I said. "It is the federal government, and I do not negotiate with criminals." I pressed the red icon and ended the call. I turned the device off, placing it face down on the glass desk. The silence in my office felt different now. It was the sound of a slate being wiped clean. But the tremor they felt was only the foreshock. The real earthquake was scheduled for tomorrow morning when the agents carrying the federal search warrants arrived at their front door. Thursday morning broke with a heavy fog rolling off the river, covering the affluent suburbs in a thick gray blanket. At precisely 6 in the morning, the manufactured piece of Maplewood Drive was permanently shattered. 3 unmarked black sport utility vehicles pulled up to the curb outside my parents' brick colonial house. 12 federal agents stepped out onto the damp asphalt. They did not wear suits. They wore navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow lettering across the back, indicating their agency affiliation. They moved with a practiced, synchronized efficiency. There were no sirens, There was only the heavy, rhythmic crunch of tactical boots marching up the bluestone pathway. The lead agent bypassed the doorbell. He pounded a heavy steel flashlight against the solid oak front door, announcing their presence and demanding immediate entry. I was sitting at my desk, miles away, drinking black coffee, but I knew exactly how the protocol unfolded. I had authorized and observed dozens of identical operations. My father answered the door, wearing a silk bathrobe, expecting perhaps a confused delivery driver or a neighbor. Instead, he found a badge pushed directly into his line of sight, accompanied by a folded piece of paper. It was a federal search and seizure warrant, signed by a magistrate judge less than 8 hours prior. The agents bypassed Richard, streaming into the foyer and systematically securing the premises. They moved from room to room with deliberate speed. The house that had hosted a lavish, catered celebration just days before was now an active crime scene. They found Chase in his basement bedroom. The self-proclaimed venture capitalist was asleep in designer silk pajamas. The agents did not wait for him to change clothes. They ordered him to stand facing the wall. They read him his Miranda rights detailing the specific statutes of wire fraud and the operation of a fraudulent commercial entity. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the subterranean suite sounded the official end of his corporate delusion. He was escorted up the stairs and walked out the front door in his sleepwear, placed into the back of a federal transport vehicle while the neighbors watched from their front windows. Meanwhile, the evidence recovery team went to work. They executed the parameters of the warrant with surgical precision. They seized my father's silver laptop from the home office. They confiscated my mother's tablet from the kitchen island. They removed every cellular device in the residence. They carried out heavy metal filing cabinets containing years of financial records, tax returns, and banking statements. They took the router, mapping the exact internet protocol address I had previously logged in my shadow file. By 8 in the morning, the house was stripped of its digital nervous system. The collateral damage began before the transport vehicle even reached the federal holding facility. Jessica, my brother's fiancée, did not rush to the courthouse to post bail. She did not hire an attorney. She recognized that the well had run dry. Within 24 hours, she packed her imported luggage, called a private car service, and abandoned the sinking ship. She did not leave quietly. She set up a ring light in her new temporary hotel room and recorded a 10-minute video for her social media channels. She wept, producing tears on command, claiming she was the victim of a sophisticated con artist. She told her followers that she had been deceived by a man pretending to be a wealthy entrepreneur. She monetized his arrest, gaining thousands of new followers through the manufactured tragedy. Chase lost his freedom, his fabricated status, and his partner all in the same afternoon. The legal inferno then turned its focus onto my parents. The United States Attorney's Office does not operate on emotion. They operate on documentation. Richard and Patricia were formally served with grand jury indictments. The charges were severe: aggravated identity theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and making false statements to a federal lending institution. The reality of the justice system is incredibly expensive. They could not hire a local defense attorney who handled minor infractions. They required a specialized white-collar criminal defense firm. Partners at those firms demand 6-figure retainers simply to review the discovery files. My parents had zero liquid capital. Every dollar they possessed was tied up in the illusion they projected to the world. Their only tangible asset was the house on Maplewood Drive. They were forced to put the property on the market immediately. Because the Small Business Administration held a fraudulent subordinate lien on the deed, the sale was incredibly complicated. They could not wait for a premium buyer. They had to execute a fire sale, accepting a cash offer. Hundreds of thousands of dollars below market value just to satisfy the federal debt and pay their legal counsel. The manicured lawn, the custom kitchen, the marble island where my father had laughed in my face. They lost it all. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of the city, trading their kingdom for a defense strategy. As their world burned, the extended family ecosystem activated. Relatives who had not spoken to me in years suddenly found my phone number. Aunts, uncles, and cousins began leaving long, angry voicemails on my personal device. They adopted the role of flying monkeys, deployed to guilt-trip the rogue daughter back into submission. They called me a monster. They said I was destroying my own flesh and blood over a simple financial misunderstanding. They parroted the narrative my mother had spun, claiming I was a vindictive bureaucrat trying to ruin my brother's bright future out of sheer jealousy. "Blood is thicker than water," one aunt declared, insisting I withdraw my statements and drop the charges. They believed their collective disapproval would shame me into compliance. I did not return a single phone call. I did not engage in a single emotional argument. Instead, I logged into the public access to court electronic record system. The grand jury indictments had been formally unsealed, making the matters a public record. I downloaded the dense legal document outlining every forged signature, every stolen dollar, and every calculated lie my family had executed. I drafted a single mass email addressing it to every relative who had left a voicemail. I did not write a greeting. I did not offer an explanation or defense of my actions. I simply attached the federal document and hit send. The silence that followed was profound. The flying monkeys vanished instantly. Reading a federal indictment detailing how a mother and father stole their own daughter's social security number to buy a sports car destroys any narrative of a simple misunderstanding. The truth stripped away their moral high ground, leaving them with nothing to say. I watched the chaos unfold from a distance, entirely untouched by the flames. Because the prosecution was handled under federal jurisdiction, the restorative process for my identity was swift and permanent. The Fair Credit Reporting Act contained strict mandates for victims of proven criminal fraud. A certified letter arrived at my desk from the agency detailing the exact remediation steps. Every derogatory mark, every fraudulent inquiry, and every maxed-out credit line was legally expunged from my profile. My credit score returned to its pristine state. The $250,000 liability was erased. I was free. I had severed the anchor and watched them sink under their own weight. The narrative should have ended there, with a clean break and a quiet life. But financial crimes are rarely isolated events. When the federal agents seized the hard drives from the McLean house, they did not just stop at the small business loan. They mapped the entire historical financial ecosystem of Chase Global Solutions. 2 months after the raid, the dust seemed to have settled over the wreckage of my former family. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a routine compliance audit on a Tuesday afternoon when my office phone rang. It was Marcus, my division director. He asked me to step into his office immediately. When I walked through the frosted glass doors, the atmosphere felt distinctively heavy. There was another man sitting in the leather guest chair. He wore a sharp navy suit and possessed the unmistakable posture of a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent. Marcus introduced him as Special Agent Harrison from the White Collar Division. Harrison reached into his briefcase and placed a thick manila envelope onto the glass table. The red evidence seal was broken. Inside was a secondary grand jury indictment. He looked at me and asked a simple question. "Did you really think a 29-year-old failure with no financial background could design a corporate structure capable of defrauding a federal loan program entirely on his own?" I stared at the paperwork. I pulled the heavy stock papers out, expecting to see additional charges related to the car loan. Instead, the primary defendant listed at the top of the page was my father. And the charges were staggering. The document detailed systemic corporate embezzlement, massive money laundering, and racketeering. Harrison explained the true architecture of the crime. My father was a senior logistics director for a multinational shipping conglomerate. He had always projected the image of a wealthy, high-earning executive, but his actual corporate salary could never support the manicured estate, the country club memberships, and the endless stream of capital he fed to my brother. For a decade, Richard had been skimming off the top of his own employer, creating ghost vendors and routing massive payments into offshore holding accounts. But stolen capital is useless if you cannot wash it. That is where Chase and his phantom consulting firm came into play. Chase Global Solutions was not created to steal a $250,000 small business loan. That was just a greedy afterthought. The fake business was actually a highly functioning laundromat built by my father to convert a decade of embezzled corporate funds into clean personal income. Richard was funneling his embezzled corporate funds through Chase Global Solutions, disguising the stolen dirty money as legitimate consulting revenue. They had run this operation flawlessly for 10 years, flying entirely under the radar. Their fatal flaw was their own unbridled greed. When Chase demanded a new German sports car to impress his fiancée, Richard did not want to trigger an internal corporate audit by pulling too much dirty cash out of the offshore accounts at once. They decided to finance the vehicle through traditional channels. But my brother's credit was ruined from years of reckless spending. So they decided to steal my identity. By forging my signature on the auto loan and the federal business grant, they inadvertently tied a federal financial auditor directly to their criminal enterprise. They handed the government the exact thread needed to unravel a 10-year embezzlement ring. If they had simply paid for the car in cash or left my name alone, they might have retired wealthy. Instead, their arrogance brought the entire federal apparatus crashing down upon their heads. The federal justice system does not offer generous plea deals to uncooperative defendants who steal millions of dollars from major corporate entities. The trial was swift and devoid of any cinematic suspense. I sat in the back row of the gallery on the day of their sentencing. Richard wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. The tailored cashmere sweaters and the booming patriarchal confidence were gone. His hair was thinning gray and unkempt. The federal judge delivered a blistering statement regarding his profound breach of fiduciary duty before handing down a sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Chase stood next to him at the defense table. Without his designer clothes and his social media status, he looked incredibly small. The trademark smirk had been entirely stripped away. He received a 5-year sentence for his role in operating the shell company and facilitating the wire fraud. As the armed bailiffs led them out of the courtroom through the side door, neither of them looked back at the gallery. The empire they built on lies and stolen labor evaporated in front of my eyes. The asset forfeiture protocols claimed everything else. The government seized their bank accounts, their retirement portfolios, and the remaining equity from the forced fire sale of the brick colonial house. The recovered funds were used to pay restitution to the shipping conglomerate. My mother, Patricia, was not formally indicted for the embezzlement because Richard kept her name off the corporate ledgers to shield her from liability. But the financial devastation left her destitute. The woman who used to sip vintage wine and mock my independence now lives in a 300-square-foot studio apartment on the industrial side of the city. She works 30 hours a week as a cashier at a discount retail store. I drove past the strip mall once. I watched her through the glass storefront wearing a stiff polyester uniform, scanning barcodes under flickering fluorescent lights. The entitlement that once defined her existence had been replaced by sheer exhaustion. The agency recognized my role in exposing the syndicate. Uncovering a decade-long corporate embezzlement ring earned me a significant commendation. I was elevated to a senior investigator role, granting me a substantial salary increase and leadership over my own task force. I used the pay raise to finalize my relocation. I bypassed the standard apartment complexes and purchased a beautiful high-rise condominium overlooking the city skyline. The floors are solid oak. The kitchen features custom stone countertops. I bought it using my own pristine credit score and the money I earned through my own relentless labor. There are no forged signatures on my mortgage. I stand on my balcony at night, watching the headlights stream across the bridge below. The air is quiet up here. I think about that Sunday dinner when my father laughed at me and told me that family takes care of family. He was right, in a twisted way. They took care of themselves using my future as their collateral. People often ask if I feel guilty for tearing my family apart. I answer them honestly. I did not destroy my family. Their own arrogant entitlement did. I merely handed them the mirror they spent decades avoiding. When you build a house out of stolen glass, you cannot blame the storm when it finally shatters. It has been 14 months since the federal raid on Maplewood Drive. The the rain is beating against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my high-rise condo. But up here, 20 stories above the asphalt, the sound is just a gentle, rhythmic hum. I am no longer eating cheap instant noodles at a particle board counter in Alexandria. I am sitting in a leather armchair, drinking loose-leaf tea, watching the red taillights of the city traffic blur through the wet glass. The air in my home smells like cedar and clean linen. It smells like freedom. People often send me messages asking how I survive the psychological fallout without breaking down. They want a step-by-step roadmap on how to dismantle a parasitic family dynamic. But the truth is, the mechanics of my survival were less about the federal investigation and entirely about a fundamental shift in my own core mindset. Looking back at the wreckage of my former life, I walked away with 5 unshakable lessons. First, blood is a biological reality, not a moral obligation. Society relentlessly conditions us to believe that shared DNA requires infinite forgiveness. It does not. If a stranger stole your social security number and leveraged a $250,000 loan against your name, you would contact the authorities without hesitation. The mathematical calculation of abuse should never change simply because the thief shares your lineage. Second, boundaries without consequences are merely suggestions. For years, I politely asked my parents to stop demanding my resources to cushion my brother's failures. My requests were ignored because they carried no weight. A boundary only becomes real when you are fully prepared to enforce the penalty for crossing it, even if that penalty involves a federal indictment. Third, silence is the most devastating response to manipulation. Parasitic individuals thrive on emotional engagement. They crave the screaming matches, the tearful text messages, and the dramatic ultimatums, because chaos is a language they fluently speak. When you meet their hysteria with cold, methodical silence, their entire artificial ecosystem collapses under its own weight. Fourth, financial independence is your ultimate armor. The only reason I could walk away without looking back was because I held the keys to my own physical survival. Every overnight shift, every skipped vacation, and every scholarship application built the fortress that eventually protected me. Never let anyone else hold the deed to your stability. Finally, true peace requires leaving the broken pieces exactly where they fall. When my father's corporate embezzlement ring was exposed and my mother was reduced to working a retail register, my instinct was not to fix their lives. Healing meant accepting that their ruin was the natural harvest of the seeds they spent decades planting. You cannot save people who are committed to their own destruction. I do not check on them. I do not search the federal inmate database for updates on my brother's sentence or my father's appeals. My focus is entirely forward. My career is thriving, my credit is impeccable, and my apartment is quiet. It is a profound, beautiful quiet that I earned through the fire. If you are sitting in the dark right now, wondering if you should finally cut the cord on the people dragging you underwater, let this be your sign. Choose your own survival. I want to ask you a question. If you found out your parents were using your identity to fund a criminal enterprise, would you have the strength to send them to prison? Or, what is the hardest boundary you have ever had to enforce? Drop your answer in the comments below. Thank you for walking through this journey with me on Sweet Karma Life. If these lessons resonated with your own experiences, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories. I will see you in the next video.